Good morning, I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Deborah Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
In just a minute, our Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. 40 Pennsylvania firefighters arrived in California this week to help battle the devastating wildfires. The fires are blamed for at least 29 deaths. Some much-needed rain fell this week, but with it came the threat of landslides and mudslides. How can you help a Pennsylvania ministry serve as the hands and feet of Christ to those who have lost everything? Plus, Jeff, you did interview, or you will be interviewing, California Assemblyman James Gallagher on what steps he's taking to prevent catastrophic fires in the future.
I think we're learning so much, and for Pennsylvania, as always, is in the thick of it. So,
and
yes, you're wearing red in tribute to our firemen who are heading out there.
That is right. They're certainly doing a wonderful job.
They are indeed. Well, as fragmented facts emerge from Wednesday's heartbreaking, deadly collision between an American Airlines passenger plane and a Black Hawk helicopter, President Trump took to the podium yesterday to lay blame on his predecessor's diversity policies while saying, "We don't know what led to this crash." The president isn't alone, though. Theories are raging through social media, even as families are entering this first phase of grief. So what can we do as ordinary citizens responding to complex, difficult news events to put out the flames of gossip? How can we avoid being a part of the rumor chain?
Yeah, and at this time, you really don't need gossip.
Correct.
I mean, people are grieving. This is such a difficult time, especially as we're learning more about the names, the people that were on board aboard that flight.
That's right, Deborah.
Well, during the second day of Senate confirmation hearings, pro-life senators pressed President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They were looking for clarity on his abortion position. The former presidential candidate said he believes every abortion is a tragedy, adding we cannot be a moral nation if we have 1.2 million abortions a year, which is really such a high number. Is RFK's position a good first step in finding common ground on an issue continuing to divide the country?
That's a good question. I mean, the surveys point to a divided country, but we've been divided for about 50 years on this. And at some point, you have to say, is there any way we can look at this issue and find common ground?
Yeah, common ground is key.
Well, Sunday will mark 128 years since a great winter fire destroyed Pennsylvania's state capitol in the middle of a snowstorm. It took all of an hour and a half to demolish the seat of power. There were no fatalities. That was the good news. But almost immediately, the legislature reconvened across the street at Grace United Methodist Church. That morning, the Senate chaplain ended the opening prayer asking God to grow their faith, and here's the quote, "Turn our hearts from the vanishing facts of earth and cause us to look and live to the unseen, the real, the abiding." What is it about the horrors of fires and plane crashes that forces us to see what the Senate chaplain called the real? How can we have faith in the invisible when all seems lost? We'll take these questions in the Morning Light panel this morning. And this has been a stellar panel this week. They all are. I'm not saying we have favorites, but this group really has gelled, and I wish I could take people into the green room and hear your conversations.
Yes, not us. We don't wish that, I don't think. But no, just...
What if we had been recording this whole week? Yeah. Fun. So I want to talk about, we're talking about fires today, and rumors are a fire that is really invisible. Social media has created the ultimate rumor mill, where it's almost like if you see it with a picture and it's typed, you don't necessarily recognize it as a falsehood. How do you, when you're looking at whether to post or repost something, how can we kind of stop, look, and listen before we repeat and become part of the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been just this air of things growing. A lot of the nice thing is apps are starting to implement what are called community notes, which people can help by saying, okay, this is untrue, and rather than immediately censoring it, it puts that warning up for people before they share. But
for some of our viewers, when you're saying an app, that means when we're on the Facebook or the Instagram, right? Yeah. So when they're on there and it'll say, hey, you post something false, a little alert comes up and says, people don't
it's
like
something that other people can put up, but the app isn't just stepping over and taking posts down.
I see.
But if someone sees it and goes, well, this is contradictory of what the Times said or what CBS said, they can kind of put that up and link to, here's the actual story.
Is it difficult, Cynthia, when you're processing information, you go, oh, that ain't right, to just go and straight to your social media, and do you feel it bubbling up, like you want to say something, and maybe you haven't checked all the facts?
Sure. And don't we get, it's so easy to be drawn into it.
Yeah.
You know, both good and bad. But, you know, it's similar to an addiction. It's like we have to cut it off and have support around us to do it. Because we live in a world, and I'm going to say the younger generation, but it's my generation as well, we'll look and go, oh, you know, boy, that picture, I wish I was in the Caribbean.
It's like a gawking,
you know,
like a drive-by.
it really is. That's a great word. It really is.
Does the Bible have anything to say about this?
Well, you know, I think we've taken the whole biblical idea of the power of the tongue, and we've moved it into a whole different arena and suggested that the power of our words have become the thing that can steer a mighty ship, or you know, the rudder, right? And Scripture tells us the tongue can do some amazingly wonderful things, but it also can do an incredible amount of damage. And we
the
have
tongue
to be
is connected to the
sensitive.
heart.
Right, it is connected. Whatever comes out of the mouth is first coming from the heart. That's correct, right?
So what do we do? What's your warning to someone saying,
You know, there's
should
gotta
I
be,
post this?
right.
Should I?
You know, I remember my mom saying to me, count to 10 first, right? You know, I think one of the things that would be good for us to do is to stop, check our heart, pray about it, and do that count to 10
Before
kinda
you
check
post,
in.
count
right.
to 10.
Yeah, exactly, right?
That
sounds simplistic.
Write
but-
that on your fridge.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about RFK Jr. Look, if you want to talk about good TV, made for TV, it's been these hearings. But for decades, hearings have been a sensation, and people play to the cameras. And thinking back to Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings and all that, we love a good story, and senators enjoy, it seems, the primetime cameras on them. But there was a particular line of questioning that I know pro-life people who've been very concerned about the credentials of Robert F. Kennedy in this one area, which is Health and Human Services protecting the vulnerable and protecting preborn life. And he said something yesterday which I thought was fascinating, which he said, every abortion is a tragedy. Progressives, some of them, pro-choice progressives, said, really, you're caught. You're not really one of us. Pro-lifers said, okay, well, that's maybe a starting point. Is there a point, I'll stay with you here, where you can find common ground and at least agreeing, hey, something is off here when 1.2 million children don't live because of abortion?
Right. Well, I think it's part and parcel of a larger issue that we have, you know, quality of life, importance of life, value of life. I think that's the larger question. But when we come down to the questioning of what happened yesterday and the statement of 1.2 million, one of the things that I think that's really important is for people to see that statistic and understand it's dynamic, its impact on who we are as a people. What does it say about us? What does it say about who we are and how we value life and how important life is?
And this isn't even whether it should be legal or not or anything.
Right,
This is,
right. Now, that's a pendulum swing in your face kind of statement.
Right.
You know, we're gonna go all the way over here, and the hope is, and what I hear you asking is can we take that pendulum swing statement and bring us back to a place where we can all sit at the table and speak about how
even
we
if
move
laws are never
forward.
changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cynthia, how did that comment strike you, and how did those numbers hit you?
I didn't realize the numbers. I think a lot of people were shocked by the numbers, especially in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. One in every 5 pregnancies in Pennsylvania ends in abortion.
Yeah. It's really, really a difficult place to be, I think, in caring on both sides, caring for both sides of a woman in that situation, to be able to sit down and say, there are choices out there for you that don't involve abortion.
A lot of people don't hear that, do they? They don't know that there's love and compassion, especially if they feel shame or they're feeling pressure
and
from a
fear.
partner.
And pastors love to be in the middle of these conversations, and oftentimes we're exited out. There are lots of times when pastors are not consulted, and we would love to be.
We used to say that, right? This is, people say this is between a woman, her priest, or her pastor. And you're right, pastors and priests are not really a part of this conversation.
Not often enough.
I need to pivot only because, look, Sunday is coming up on an anniversary we don't think about too often, which is the burning of the state capitol. And it wasn't an arsonist, it was a twist of providence that somebody, the lieutenant governor's fireplace had a spark and the building goes up in flames. But I thought what was cool about it, first, was that the legislature almost immediately reconvenes. The governor finds a place across the street at Grace United Methodist Church. And then the opening prayer, which I thought was beautiful. Let me just read this to you, a little more context here. He ends, Reverend Sangri says, "May thy servants, the representatives of this state, set a high example, be an object lesson to all citizens, especially the children of this Commonwealth, of what their representatives can accomplish under greatly changed and adverse circumstances by their cheerful submission to this providence," the providence being the fire. And then he closes, "Quicken our faith, O God, in thee, and turn our hearts from the vanishing facts of earth, and cause us to look at the unseen, the real, the abiding, and the eternal." A lot of people who are skeptical about God because you can't see him, right? Maybe you can feel his presence, but you certainly can't see him, would hear that and say, well, those are just really nice words. But this is not a light prayer. This is the pastor saying, hey, look at your representatives, because they're going to go back to work, but they're doing it because they trust in God. How does that strike you? I mean, this is in language we don't use. It's a little formal.
Yeah, I think it's honestly beautiful, because it also goes to the point of they didn't care about what could have broken it up. They were together, united, trying to figure out how can we make life better for everyone. And honestly, it's refreshing to see that we were there at one point with politics. And so I think it's because they all have that hope, that driving factor, and it's something that we need to get back to is, in spite of everything, I'm not going to worship, not because of everything I'm going to worship.
That is really interesting. Yeah, and of course they did it in a church too, which sent a significant message about the importance of putting God ahead of all of it. When you hear somebody talk about the real and the unseen, that the invisible world is more real than the visible world, how does that strike you, Cynthia?
Well, isn't that faith? That's faith.
Yeah.
I mean, we walk by faith right now, knowing that our faith is going to eventually take us to heaven to meet our Maker. But we are so involved in this world right now and are worried about this social media post and how it affects our life in the next 10 minutes. But faith tells us we should be walking by faith.
Because that feels more real, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Take 30 seconds and just, you're a historian, you're a lover of history, really, and you've spent a lot of time talking about our Harrisburg history. Are we losing a bit of this thread? Oh,
yeah, absolutely. We lose it every time we distance ourselves just a little bit more from the historic documents and the historic realization of who we have been. And I think it's important to understand history, whether it was this building or the very fact that they continued to meet at Grace Church and until the Capitol was rebuilt. Grace Methodist Church became the new location for government for a season. And we talk about separation of church and state, right? And here's the state meeting in a church because that's what they could do and were able to do. And I think that was an important time.
Nobody was telling anybody what to believe, but just recognizing that we're not in charge.
And we're all in this together, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful week, and please come back.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, improving California's wildfire prevention response and recovery efforts, my conversation with California Assemblyman and Minority Leader James Gallagher, who met with President Trump earlier this week. That's up next. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV. Well, for those of us watching this tragic chapter of California's wildfires, the images of total destruction, warlike images, streets filled with charred vehicles and hollowed out streets, it's really unimaginable. One of the key voices emerging out of the Golden State is Assemblyman James Gallagher. He's now the Assembly's minority leader, the Republican leader. He's also a fifth-generation rice and walnut farmer, a husband and father of 5. Leader Gallagher, thanks for making time for us this morning. I know it's early.
Yeah, great to be with you again, Jeff.
Could you help us make sense of why California is on fire? I think for those of us seeing images, they are unimaginable. They do look like a Hollywood scene. What is happening? Big picture, wide shot.
I mean, really big picture is, in California, historically, we've had, terrible drought seasons and terrible flood seasons. And that's probably gotten even worse over the last 50 years. But a big problem is that we haven't, at the same time, we have not gotten into our wildlands and done the brush clearing, thinning, prescribed fire that is really needed to, get at this sort of tinderbox of fuel that's on our public lands. And so when we have, high wind events, as we often do, if there is a spark, from a power line or maybe a tire blowout, a lightning strike, that spark creates a huge catastrophic mega fire with all this fuel that's out on the land. And it makes it into a conflagration that we can't stop. And we saw that in Paradise that I represent. And now we saw that recently down in LA.
Okay, so if I'm sitting in Pennsylvania, as I am this morning, people, whenever they see a tragedy, either on a coastal community where there's the potential for tsunamis or big storms, how do you tell people that, is California generally ready for these types of events? And how does a homeowner prepare? I mean, how do your constituents prepare for events like this? Or was this just unthinkable at this scale?
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot, when it comes to fire like this. We do need to be better prepared. We need to be clearing around our homes, removing brush and small trees, making sure that we're, not like this, maybe stacking firewood against a house. Probably not a good idea when you're in the wildland.
Sure.
We've also learned that, we do need to harden our homes and do things like having covers over vents. There's new technology in home building that makes, that we can make our homes much more fire resilient. Those are all things that we can certainly do. But
what does the government do? What did you tell the president that California needs to do? And are there regulatory barriers? Are there things that Washington has done or Sacramento has done that keeps homeowners from being able to protect their properties?
Exactly. I mean, that's where I was going, is the bigger picture really is getting the sort of environmental regulations out of the way of projects that protect communities. And so when we need to do prescribed fire, we need to remove and thin trees and brush. Even we use goats, to go on the land and get rid of brush. When we do those types of projects, many times environmental rules get in the way. They say you've got to do a full environmental report. That could take 18 months. And then if a group decides to sue, it delays that project out longer.
Let me just ask you, take 30 seconds as we close here. You're a believer. You're someone who looks at these events and knows that God is ultimately in control of these things. But how do you want our viewers to be praying for and encouraging and supporting what's going on there? And how are you as a believer looking at these events and encouraging your neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, people are going through this in LA. I went through this with my own community, and my heart just, really went out to them, and I've been praying for them. I've been praying for some of my colleagues that, got evacuated. Yeah. Continue to pray for us out here. But I think also, our Christian community is so amazing that they come out and help during these disasters. I myself remember during Katrina, going and helping out in Mississippi. Our greater Christian community, hey, how can we kind of love on our brothers and sisters, find ways to help people recover? Because there's a lot of people that are hurting right now. Their entire life is in ashes. And so finding ways that we can help either monetarily, or I know sometimes a lot of people just with helps and ministries like that can certainly be helpful to these folks out here in California.
Well, Leader Gallagher, we're going to be supporting organizations like Samaritan's Purse and Convoy of Hope and so many others that are there in California. Thanks for making time for us today, and God bless you as you enter this next challenging phase of the rebuild. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
Well, coming up next on Morning Light, the California wildfires have caused widespread damage and displaced countless families without shelter and basic needs, but Mission Central is committed to being a source of hope. Deborah will sit down with the executive director to explain how you can help. We'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome back. You just heard a California lawmaker talk about his fight to end catastrophic wildfires. Now you can put your faith into action in a tangible way. Mission Central is helping displaced families with basic needs. Joining me to talk about their efforts is Executive Director Hope Harrison. Thank you for being with us. Last time we talked, it was about the flooding situation in the Carolinas, and there's still certainly a need there.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's going to be a long-term recovery effort there.
And let's talk about now the recovery effort in California.
Absolutely. So Mission Central is part of a 7-warehouse nationwide disaster relief network, and slightly different than what happened in the Carolinas. The recovery for fire is very different. There's just such utter devastation and everything has been wiped out. And so we will come in and we will work with those who do have some ability to get back into their homes. It's going to be a long-term situation because fire and smoke damage takes a long time to get rid of. So we'll work with them on their needs. But then those who have had utter devastation, they're starting at square one. They've lost everything. And so they're going to need everything, really. You know, they have little to no belongings. They'll need things like clothing and shoes, but they'll also need things like medical equipment and something as simple as maybe a clarinet if the student plays in the school band. So it's very broad.
I can't imagine losing everything. And there are so many people there who have lost everything. So what are you providing them?
Sure. So we right now are working, and we work all year long on collecting disaster relief supplies. And then the boots on the ground organizations reach out to us after they do an assessment and tell us what the needs are. So we anticipate that since this is long term, those needs will change over time. Right now we're collecting things like hygiene items, cleaning supplies, menstrual hygiene items, clothing and shoes that are new or gently used, and then school supplies as well.
So for them, these are initial needs, but they're going to need they'll have long-term needs.
Absolutely.
For a long time.
Absolutely. So disaster response is a little misunderstood. People see the immediate need, and we as a society want to jump in, which is wonderful. And it's brilliant that people want to do that. But then the next thing happens, and people sort of forget that there are these incredibly long-term needs. And so we will work in the immediate, but then we're also there for many months and potentially many years as these people have a very long road to full recovery.
And what are some of the long-term needs? How do you supply them?
So we wait until the boots on the ground organizations reach out to us and they will say, we've done an assessment, this is where we are. Things progress and things change. So immediately they'll need things like soap and toothpaste and toothbrushes. But longer term, they're gonna look at what else do they need. And that changes.
Yeah.
We're very responsive to the need. So we find out, we don't assume, we find out what the need is and then we collect and get that out where it needs to go.
And while you're doing this, how do you spread the gospel?
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much live by Matthew 25:40, which is whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters, you do for me. So we are the hands and feet of Christ in what we do. We believe in the redemptive and unconditional love of God for everyone, everywhere. And so we do that on a daily basis, knowing that somebody will come back and try to find out where that came from and see what Mission Central stands for.
How can our viewers help?
Yeah, so first and foremost, if you don't have anything to give, pray. That's always the first thing we tell people is lift up prayers for those that have been affected. But also we accept material and monetary donations. Material donations help us to get those things that are most in need. And we accept those Monday through Friday from 9 to 3 at our warehouse in Mechanicsburg. And there's a variety of ways to give monetarily as well. And so we're just very, very grateful for the support that helps us to meet those needs.
And I'm sure you do have many needs. I mean, it's been a very active time of year, active 6 months. I mean, has it ever been like this before?
This has been very, very hard, a very hard 6 months because of the level of devastation. We always have disasters, but Hurricane Helene and Milton were just incredibly devastating, something that we haven't seen in probably over a decade. And now the fires have just been incredibly devastating as well. So it seems like we're jumping from one incredibly devastating situation to another. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, thank you so much for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And if you would like to make a donation to help the victims of the California wildfires, visit missioncentral.org. Stay with us. We are back right after the break.
Welcome back. Well, I read an interview with an air traffic controller, highly trained, smart guy. but also someone who is deeply dependent on God to make those right decisions in the high-pressure hours in the tower. John Archer says colleagues want to know, what's the secret of this calm? Where do you get this from? How can you not be anxious? He says, it's all God. He's at work in me, and he's with me. When there's a potential crisis, that adrenaline kicks in, he says, and you don't have any time to think about anything else. But then he says it's afterwards that he's able to take time and decompress on how God was with me, guiding me and sustaining me. I feel his peace and I'm aware of his power and sovereignty. Can you imagine that? Being in the high pressure situation of up there in the tower, all of those lives depending on you, but he depends on God. Sure, John is skilled, but he's no Superman. The secret of his cool and his calm under pressure isn't a mental game. It's full reliance on God's power. The same power available to you and me in whatever he's called us to do today. Pretty reassuring, isn't it? For Deborah and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching this week. Enjoy the weekend. Go check on your neighbors. God willing, we'll see you right back here next week.